Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Viking.TV this Wednesday evening, at least where I'm at in Norway. My name is Jørn Henriksen. I'm the Director of Expedition Operations in Viking Expeditions. I look forward to spending the next perhaps 1 hour with you.
And hello everybody, my name is Damon Stanwell-Smith and I am the Head of Science and Sustainability here at Viking Expeditions, and I also very much look forward to sharing with you some insights about Viking Expeditions over the next hour.
Yes, and Expedition Wednesdays. This is the first episode, of which we hope will become more episodes in the weeks going forward. We have had some expedition content previously on Viking.TV, and Viking Expeditions is a new part of Viking. So we decided to give it some attention, and we will meet you every Wednesday going forward with exciting expedition content and expedition relevant content. Both Damon and I have worked in the expedition industry for decades now, and we have met so many interesting people, and we have seen quite a lot of quite interesting things in the destinations where we're going to sail to, in particular in polar regions, perhaps. And we would like to use this opportunity on the Wednesdays to share this with you. And this is obviously also in anticipation of us building and preparing for expedition operations that would commence in 2022 early. So you will be presented to quite a few of the facets of expedition cruising, this segment of cruising, and we'll try to take you behind the scenes and create some excitement about what we're going to do in the years to come.
And I'd like to also highlight the partnerships that we have developed. We're honoured to be working with some world-class academic institutions, including Cambridge University, Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, as part of the federal government in the USA. And so for us, these are real voyages of discovery, both for guests coming on board and for scientific research as well.
And therefore we will have three facets of Expedition Wednesdays, where we will introduce you to extraordinary expeditioners that we have met, that we are inspired by, and that we sometimes talk with and sometimes will actually be on board our expedition ships. We will introduce you to partners, and you've already perhaps seen on Mondays where Dr. Julian Doddswell, the director of Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge, have kindly showed us around in the facilities of their institute in Cambridge, the museum and their collection, which has been highly inspiring. The third part is behind the scenes, how we plan and how we are preparing for sailing into these areas where Viking has not sailed before. So to start with, who are we? We'd like to share a little bit of background of ourselves before we go into other things. We have background in expedition polar work and how we plan safe and enriching operations in polar regions and in expedition regions.
So if you'll indulge us, we'll now just reflect a little on our pasts, which we hope will inform you as to our feelings towards how Viking Expeditions can be shaped and taken forward in the future. So Jørn, where does your love for remote exploration originate?
Well, I think it's something I was born with. I come from Tromsø, northern Norway, which is well within the Arctic Circle in North Norway. I have ancestors that have worked with nature, and even Sami, the indigenous people in Norway, is part of my ancestry. And from very, very early years, I was exposed to the love of being outdoors. And you could already perhaps see this image with me on a fishing trip with my grandfather, who was a fisherman. He worked with nature. He was an amateur marksman, and he would always take me out and do all kinds of exciting things in nature when I used to visit my grandparents in the summertime. So that was very formative for me, and I realized having a good guide, a good helper, and a mentor together with me made me appreciate being outdoors to a much higher degree, perhaps. I also, living in the Arctic, if you want to be out. If you're an outdoors person, it's winter most of the year. It's perpetual darkness. The sun is below the horizon, and you go out winter camping. And I was a scout when I was a kid, and this image is actually from when I went out winter camping for the first time on a real winter camping trip. It was some 10 kilometers of skiing, not very far, and then we dug snow caves and slept in tents and did everything, and we were taught by the elder scouts how to do that. And I remember I almost I froze, and I realized I had to do some adjustments on that voyage. But I found a love for being out in the wintertime, really, in that moment. And I continued doing winter mountaineering, skiing, and all kinds of different things in the mountains in the vicinity of Tromsø, where we are lucky enough to have alpine scenery and really fantastic conditions, especially in the spring when the midnight sun starts coming back. You can go mountaineering in perpetual daylight. You don't have to worry it getting dark. So I continued doing that well in through my career. I took education in the Norwegian Air Force, and actually these images of me doing winter mountaineering is when I was working as an officer in the Norwegian Air Force. And I started bringing other soldiers that sometimes came from southern Norway out in the mountains in northern Norway, and it wasn't a youth group, but they were ever so enthusiastic. And I continued doing that through university, being a guide, arranging trips, setting up for creating experiences in the mountains for students. And whilst I was studying political science at the university, I gradually ventured more and more into working as a professional guide in Svalbard, because I by then had gathered enough background to arrange commercial voyages in polar regions. And I started out skiing, hiking, climbing in the wilderness of Svalbard, but I eventually got into expedition cruising, and in this image you can see me as a young expedition leader. When the boats still only had 20-some guests, and we sailed out into the Arctic Ocean without satellite communication like we have today, and we were gone for a week, a fortnight, and like on this image, we landed, or we didn't land, we stepped out on the sea ice in the Arctic Ocean. and together with my companion there, my colleague Gordon, we made sure it was a safe experience for the guests to step onto the sea ice in the Arctic Ocean. So really, that is a little bit of my background, and I have the last 20 years worked in different positions, arranging operations, planning operations, and undertaking operations in polar regions, both in the north and the south, where we are going to sail with Viking Expeditions. And Damon, what about you?
Well, for me, I didn't grow up in the Arctic like you. I had a more, if you like, abstract interest in exploration initially. I grew up in Cambridge as a small child. And then when I was about 10 years old, I moved to West London. And in fact, when I was digging through things in the loft, I found an old jumper, a Sea Scout uniform. And if you'll see, if I could put that to the camera there, you'll see that it's the 14th Richmond Vikings. So at the age of 10, my scouting led me to Vikings as an entity to be inspired by. That was after the fact we had a whaler that we used to row around, a 100-year-old 5-oar whaler that we used to row around and on the River Thames and then out to sea. And on a serious note, for my interest in exploration was very much always tied up with research. And so when I was at university, a little bit like you're describing, Jørn, with your trips to the Arctic, I was first inspired to go to East Africa. And I got involved with a non-governmental organization that ran expeditions in Tanzania in particular. And I'm going to have a slide put up with showing me in 1990 as a student. This is an image I thought sort of bailing out an old Arab dhow. Point being there is that we're using traditional tools and boats that maybe not the best suited for expeditions, but we're going to get to what one does to sort of plan ships that are not repurposed, that are designed and bespoke for going to remote places. But I got the taste in East Africa, and I spent quite a bit of time out there in the summers of university and then afterwards. And an opportunity arose for me to join the British Antarctic Survey in 1992. And I was lucky enough to be selected to be both a marine biologist with the survey, but also as a professional diver. And I trained as a professional diver in Scapa Flow in the Orkneys, and then went out and spent 3 years from the ages of 22 through to the age of 25 on a base called Signy Island in the South Orkney Islands, which is an extraordinary experience. And there's going to be an image coming up of the midwinter images. We did have colour photography. It wasn't that long ago, although the 2 images I'm showing are both monochrome. I also ran the darkroom there as well, so I sort of muddled through taking lots of black and white images. And living there was an extraordinary experience, very formative. It was a very professional operation. British Antarctic Survey has been arguably Britain's longest and best funded expedition for the last 75 years. And it taught me very much about logistics and about preparation and about good training and about the camaraderie and the rounding of the corners of living in remote places. And it's very much shaped the rest of the way, both professional life and possibly the way that I've led personal things as well. And as well as being there on the base, which was extraordinary itself, I also had the chance to dive under sea ice. I'm going to elaborate more on this in another broadcast, but I'm going to show you just one image here of climbing out of an ice hole. I dived over 500 times under the ice and had some extraordinary experiences. I have a very healthy respect for leopard seals now. I had various interactions and various whales and so on, and also led. I did research when I was there as well on plankton. And again, the field science side is going to be for another broadcast. And then I continued with the work, although I was with the British Antarctic Survey for 5 years, having such extraordinary opportunity to be trained by the government in remote operations and in close surface diving. I then carried that through and continued as a sideline to other work that I was doing, going back into East Africa and Southeast Asia, running expeditions there, but also working continually as a research diver and as a commercial diver in closed surface operations. I'm going to show a slide now. It's going to come up a few years later. This is in Wales. In fact, I'm talking to you from lovely Pembrokeshire, which that photo was taken, is the Smalls Lighthouse, which if you know the west coast of the British Isles, the Welsh Pembrokeshire Peninsula sticks out into the Atlantic, and there's a lighthouse a further 20 miles out further west, and that was so you need good weather to dive there, and that was us going and do some non-destructive sampling, if you will, using cameras and taking samples to look at the biota there. So the diving side is something that we're very keen to share with you, what we're doing with Viking Expeditions. Again, this is a taster now, but we'll be talking more about it in another broadcast. But but the diving also very much has informed me in the work that I've done over 20 years of the commercial diving side, of how to be disciplined, how to have operational discipline, how to have good preparation and have the right equipment. And we hope that we'll show you how those threads are drawn out when we're discussing the expedition planning as well we're doing with Viking. Now, at this point, one thing that you'll know and you'll find out for those that have not yet had the opportunity to expedition cruise is that people like Jørn and myself who've had the privilege of working as expedition leaders on these voyages are adept, if not good, at telling stories. Everything around expeditions is around narrative and around the telling of stories. In fact, you could say so much of human endeavor is around the storytelling tradition. And I must say that my colleague Jørn has an anecdote for every opportunity. And I wondered at this point, Jørn, if you would share maybe one that springs to mind with our viewers now.
Yes, of course. You know, when you sail into regions like Svalbard and Antarctica and so on, sometimes you meet people, but you don't meet that many people. But you meet wildlife as well, and one of the things that springs to mind, and that might be a little bit inspiring for our guests who may have booked already for voyages to Svalbard or is thinking of it, is a little anecdote about polar bears. Polar bears is the king of the Arctic, and it's one of the biggest predatory land or mammals. Is actually categorized as a sea mammal. And they roam around in the Arctic, and Svalbard is a quite important place for polar bears. Not only because they're there, but it's one of the few subpopulations on Earth where they are not taxed. There are no hunting on the subpopulation of polar bears in Svalbard. So when we are up there, we are merely visitors, and we go ashore, and every once in a while we will either see polar bears and see them on distance and on a safe distance. And the image I want to share with you of the female with 3 cubs is quite a unique experience I had many years back now. It's probably 15 years back, and we were out running the Zodiacs from the expedition ship where I was the expedition leader, and suddenly we realized we saw these four dots, one bigger than the others, up in the landscape, and sometimes you just see them as dots, and you have to be quite well or quite experienced to make them out being polar bears, not rocks. Anyways, when rocks starts moving, they you do know that it's something alive, and what was strange was that it's 4, because it's quite unusual to see a female with 3 cubs. It's not super unusual that they get 3 cubs, but this was quite well into the summer, almost fall, and 3 cubs rarely survive. You can see on the image that one of the cubs, I think the one in the middle, was the smaller one. And in a litter like that, you will have winners and losers, unfortunately. But that's life in the Arctic, and we kept sailing with the Zodiacs, and we realized that there were more polar bears in the area. And we didn't really understand before we came around the corner and we saw a dead walrus on the beach. And that dead walrus was a source of nutrition, source of food for wildlife in the area. And there were congregations of birds, and we saw a polar fox, and so a happening like that will act as a magnet to wildlife, and ever so often that happens. But it's quite important also to mention that this is wilderness, and nobody would place a walrus there to attract. It's something that happens in nature, and sometimes on an expedition cruise up there you come across something like that. And it was quite amazing to see this little polar bear family having a really good time at the moment. I have many anecdotes, you're right in that, and it's something about collecting the experiences that you have from these regions, because, well, they are unique. Obviously, they're yours once you travel there, and they're strong. The impressions are really, really strong, and you will remember them for the rest of your life. What about you, Damon? Did you have some extraordinary?
Well, I was going to say that. I mean, I could talk for hours. It's brevity is always a challenge. What springs to mind for me actually is an episode that you and I both were involved with, when in 2005 we were in the Antarctic together. And for the viewers, Jørn and I worked together on an icebreaker in the early noughties, when running expeditions, taking guests to mostly to the Antarctic, but also to the Arctic and other places as well. And we had a guest called Lewis Pugh join us. Now, Lewis is now actually a very accomplished advocate for ocean protection and has quite the public profile. In 2005, he was developing that, and he came with us to break, or attempt to break, the world record for the furthest south swim and the longest swim in Antarctica. And that was with guests on board as well, regular guests. So we had a mixed group. We had a medical team from the South African Institute of Sport, who were looking at extreme conditions. And for me, to see such extraordinary human endeavor. So we went down to 65 degrees south, which is the further south at the time that anyone had swum. I do believe he has broken it since, swimming further with an American base, actually, Mamodo base, I believe. But at the time, this was at Peterman Island, as a place in the Antarctic Peninsula. He meditated to get himself in the zone. Jørn and I were tasked with making sure that there were no orcas in the water swimming around that were going to bother him when he was on his swim. And he was only wearing Speedo trunks. I hope that's not too much of an endorsement. I think literally he was wearing Speedos, no goose fat or anything else. And the most extraordinary thing that he did that I've never seen before or since, it shows some of the things that humans can do in put in extraordinary places, is that as he meditated, his body temperature went up by 2 degrees Celsius. That's over 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's a phenomenon that the medical team with us said that he has that's called anticipatory thermogenesis. He can think about getting warmer, and he does. And of course, he uses that for his very cold water swims. And then he got in the water, and as we motored alongside him in a little boat, he swam up and down and was okay, and broke the world record. And there were some dramas of getting cold and taking things to the edge. But seeing a human being in such extreme conditions with this sort of horizontal snow and the water being so cold, and especially with my own personal experience previously of knowing that you're wearing a dry suit and special breathing apparatus and everything else, to be getting in the water for 30 minutes and just using the force of will to raise his temperature. And indeed, if you're watching, I'm still impressed 15 years later. And to me, whilst that wasn't jeopardy per se, and that wasn't about wildlife per se, it spoke to me of what people can do in remote places. And not suggesting that our future guests are going to be planning to be breaking world records in this, but certainly the chance of jumping in the sea is a very popular one. But it still sticks with me now. As I'm talking to you now, I still remember the feeling of watching him about to go into these real colds. But I'm going to stop wittering on anecdotes at this point, and because there are some other things that we'd like to reflect and share with you about other aspects of expeditions and things that were our motivations from the past.
Yes, and Damon, thank you for reminding me about that experience in Antarctica. I remember I was up on the bridge that morning and realized that the water should be freezing because it was below zero or below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, where water usually does freeze. And I couldn't really understand why someone wanted to swim in that cold water, and it was snowing as well. But salt water is freezing at an even lower temperature because of the salt. So that was quite an experience. However, Damon, when sailing in Antarctica and when sailing in the Arctic, these areas are not only complete natural wilderness, they are also being protected by different ways of governance. And perhaps in particular for Antarctica, you have devoted much of your life both studying and understanding this governance. Can you talk a little bit about how tourism in Antarctica, how the place is governed?
Absolutely. So I have been very fortunate in both practically being involved with expeditions, in particular with Antarctic field research and expeditions, but also how that practical experience can inform the policies that protect and look after the places themselves. And for me, the most formative time was my career at the time of the financial crash in 2008. I was working as an expedition leader on an icebreaker, and I was also undertaking marine and diving consultancy. And I felt those two disciplines were unlikely to be particularly employable when banks were collapsing all around at that time, that very heady time in 2008. And I changed jobs and I joined the United Nations Environment Programme. And at the time, that seemed a strange move, but it was looking to leverage the experience I had of looking after people as an expedition leader, and actually looking at how to look after institutions as a secretariat to bring people together. And in that role, I was overseeing a body that was looking at indicators. Indicators are ways in which data are gathered to inform policymakers, to inform decisions. It's all about stories. And I had this, what I realize now, an extraordinary opportunity to take that practical polar experience and to turn it into how governments cooperate in order, by gathering little bits of information together that resonate with the decisions that they have to make. And I ended up as the head of the marine program of an organization called the World Conservation Monitoring Centre, which is based in Cambridge in the UK. And that was very much about how governments work together cooperatively. But what it also became apparent in that work was that over half of all the oceans in the world are not governed by any one country. They are known as what is called the areas beyond national jurisdiction, or the high seas, as they're known in maritime terms. And uniquely, there is a continent that also is not governed by any one single entity, and that is, of course, the continent of Antarctica. And rolling forward through various jobs, I had the opportunity to join a body as the executive director of an extraordinary trade association that's known as the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators. And unlike maybe a regular trade association that is solely around advocating for the success of a given sector, IATO, as it's known, was formed in 1991 to contribute from the private sector to the safe and environmentally responsible approach to visiting a place that no one government controls. And so for the last 29 years, IATO has been undertaking that work. And for me, with the experience of the United Nations and then stepping into a commercial entity that was working in the same way, cooperatively, to work out how to do the right thing, to work in an ethical manner, and of course, how to work in a safe and responsible manner, and that all of those things require cooperation when in these challenging places. Now, one of the images that may have come up was also just around how the same skills when you're, or the same experience when you're expedition leading, which is around telling a story, is very, very relevant also to encouraging different countries and different individuals in different countries to cooperate together. I am convinced that as humans, we are driven by narrative. We're driven by those with, if you like, the best stories, have the strongest views, and storytelling and the narrative are as relevant within a UN context as they are within the private sector. And IATO continues to work in this way, and all of the commercial operators that go to Antarctica, to the Antarctic and Southern Ocean, are members. Viking is a member, and we work cooperatively to work out what we should, and most importantly, what we shouldn't do when we're down there. Now, I've had that experience in the Antarctic, and Jørn has had a parallel experience, deeper really, in the Arctic. And I wondered, Jørn, whether you'd share your reflections on how the northern end of the Earth works.
Yes, yeah, I can do that. It's quite interesting hearing your reflections about Antarctica, because it confluences the establishment of IATO, this industry organization, to make sure that we act as a tourism industry in Antarctica according to the Antarctic Treaty, and in particular the environmental protocol in the Antarctic Treaty, which came about after the Rio summit, which was kind of a forerunner to the climate summits we have today. where actually a Norwegian politician called Gro Harlem Brundtland had a prominent position. And out of that came the environmental protocol that is a framework that we operate within when we sail to Antarctica. However, it took quite a few years until something similar developed in the Arctic, because as opposed to the Antarctic, which is a whole continent governed by a treaty, the Arctic is a collection of sovereign nations, and you have Russia, which is perhaps the biggest Arctic nation. You have Greenland, where Denmark is responsible for their foreign policy and their areas in the Arctic. You have Nunavut and Canada. That is a huge area deep within the Arctic. United States, obviously, and Norway. And all these nations have sovereign land in the Arctic, and to establish a common framework for how an industry is operating when within these sovereign jurisdictions is slightly a different ball game. However, in the early 2000s, an organization called AECO, Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators, was established, and here you can see a screenshot from the website, and it was a reaction essentially of or a realization that many companies that arranged voyages taking guests into polar regions were not acting as one. We were all quite driven by our passion to the area and our idea that it was quite important to show these areas to the public, because as long as these quite unique areas just becomes abstract and you read about it and you see a film, which is obviously a very strong medium, it's nothing like being there yourself. And we were driven by all this love to these areas, so we think that we did the right things in terms of operating in a way that was responsible and sustainable. However, we couldn't demonstrate this, and we started out organizing ourselves and started collecting and making a common framework for what expedition cruise operators do in the Arctic. And the place for the birth of this organization was Svalbard. And that was a common denominator for the ones that started out this organization. Today, it's an organization that captures virtually every single one of small ship expedition cruise operators, from yachts to 500 guest cruise lines, coming into the Arctic with a common framework, a common set of bylaws, and especially the guidelines. The operational guidelines is the backbone of the operation, and we all comply to these guidelines, and by being members we commit to comply to these guidelines, which is very important. I had the privilege of working a lot with operations, seaborne expedition cruise operations in the Arctic, and I had the privilege of being chair of the executive committee in that organization as well. So that was really good for me personally, because I learned a lot of how to develop this industry in a direction that was wanted and not only appeared to be sustainable, but is sustainable, and takes into account that we are visitors into some of the grandest wildernesses on Earth. So that is something that we will have emphasis on with Viking Expeditions. Everyone that comes on board will get the opportunity to learn about these guidelines and to learn about how we try to operate to make sure that we are within and in compliance with the guidelines. And sometimes I use the phrase that it's not only a crew and an expedition team on board an expedition ship. We also include our guests in the expedition team, if you like, because we really do have to cooperate as a group when we're out there to make sure that we leave the place as we found it and even better, so that we can continue going into these fantastic areas in the future.
And Jørn, as you highlighted that the guests and indeed all of you that may be interested in what those guidelines are, especially for the Antarctic, where there's a lot of there's guidance around the places, there's guidance around the rules and regulations, there's guidance around the biosecurity and a lot of other things. IATO has put together a freely downloadable app that's on smartphones, both on Apple's and for Androids, so downloadable from the App Store or from Google Play. And we'll put up a grab of a session of my phone showing the Polar Guide app. And if you have an interest, if you download it, you'll find it's about 600 megabytes, so it's a fair chunk of information. It gets updated very regularly and it's kept up to date every season. It's the same app that was originally designed for professional guides and for the managers of expeditions, but is very popular with travelers generally, with guests too, to have all of the information in one place. And we know also that governmental officers and all sorts of people have it downloaded because it's just one sort of one-stop shop for the information. And as Jørn explained, you know, that the guidance is the sort of the obligations and the framework that we're all operating to, and that everybody is involved. It's not just the master, it's not just the expedition guides, it's not just the crew, it's the guests and everybody involved. That any expedition, the emphasis, although these days it feels very safe, it feels very organized, it feels it's still collectively working to go to remote places. And when we're going to polar regions in particular, we are really going literally to the ends of the earth, and we're a long way from external support. And places like that, there are aspects that we can plan for and ways in which we can run, which will absolutely mitigate as much as one can for the risk that we'll all be facing, but also maximize the enjoyment and the fulfillment and the extraordinary sort of worthiness that one feels of going to the privilege of going to these places. So we have a few watchwords that we'd like to share with you, and I'm going to invite Jørn as our expeditions director to reflect on, firstly, on operational discipline.
Yeah, well, I'll start with a quote from Amundsen. Victory awaits him who has everything in order. Luck, we call it. Defeat is definitely due for him who has neglected to take necessary precautions. Bad luck, we call it. And this was a quote that came from his voyage to try to reach the South Pole, which is an example of fantastic preparation. He was a master in logistics, and they continued preparing themselves for the long sled journey to the South Pole in 1911, whilst they were waiting in a cabin on the ice shelf of Antarctica. And we are in that phase now in Viking Expeditions, where we prepare, we choose equipment, we build the ships, and we set the perimeter for how we're going to operate. And that is extremely important, and also following obviously these plans that we make now is going to be instrumental and a success factor for us going forward.
And so we've discussed the preparation, and you mentioned about obligations to environmental commitments. How would you say that, how would you phrase how Viking Expeditions are approaching environmental commitment?
Well, we know that some of these places we're going to is in change. We see foreign species migrating further south, further north. We know that these environments that we're going to is virtually unspoilt in terms of foreign plants that have established themselves. In Antarctica, there are no land mammals, so there are a rule against bringing dogs, for example, to Antarctica. There used to be sled dogs, but that ended in the 90s. And simply understanding which way this environment is going, and what we can do to make sure that we preserve the conditions that we have today, and obviously keeping up to speed on what are the challenges and what are the opportunities for someone like us that sails to Antarctica. So obviously we're going to be vigilant and follow the guidelines and rules to sail there. We have to apply with Norwegian Polar Institute, for example. But we're also going to try to go above and beyond in terms of actually contributing to the places we're going to.
Yes, and I completely share that view that environmental commitment, a bit like ecotourism as a general phrase, it's more than just taking the trash away. It's absolutely working out how to go above and beyond, and I feel that the preparations we're making now are absolutely going in those ways.
Yeah.
Now, the third of the four watchwords is, we've mentioned it in the conversation so far, is about cooperation. And I wondered what, if instinctively, your thoughts would be about how one cooperates and what that means in a polar context when running expeditions.
Well, expedition operations, expedition cruising, cooperation has been institutionalized in a way. We, amongst, if you like, competitors, we are cooperating with sharing positions, we're cooperating with helping each other out, and we realize when we are on that side of the globe, very far away, we are one. We are a number of boats that all are members of IATO, and we try helping each other out in different instances by creating kind of an invisible network of knowing where we are in terms of sharing positions. And we also share intelligence from different places and landing sites in Antarctica. So cooperating as an industry is nothing short of very, very important, but also contributing to knowledge and experience of how to improve communications, how to improve safety, and so on. Is also something that comes with operating in these areas. And what about partners?
Well, yes, the fourth of four terms, partnership approach, is a phrase you often hear. I think it's often bandied around in society and in businesses in particular. And certainly our approach is that we want to do the things that we know how to do very well. And we would like to work with other entities that are very good at what they do very well in order to deliver the most amazing experience and also to be as safe as possible. Now, when it comes to delivering an amazing experience, we are sincere in our desire to provide a platform for unprecedented primary research being undertaken alongside all the other aspects of the expedition that will be very enriching for those on board, for the guests, and for visiting scientists alike. And we could do that entirely in-house, or we could reach out to entities that are the top of their vocation, of their specific skill set, and say, can we have a deep and meaningful relationship with you to work together in common aligned aims in order to achieve the same goal. Now, it would take us a while to reach the 800+ year history of Cambridge University, or indeed the history of the Scott Polar Research Institute, which if you've had the chance to, on the June the 8th, Professor Gillian Dowsworth, as Jørn mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast, spoke so beautifully about that amazing institution that's part of Cambridge University. And we, in the weeks to come, look forward to sharing with you and talking with other partners as well about what they have done in order to be internationally the top of their disciplines. And a partner approach, I feel, in this respect, is that we're not going to try to do individually all things. We will work with those that have already worked out how to do these things so well. And so we're looking very much forward to how this evolves. And we are confident that our partners will enjoy working with us. I think that's maybe a bold thing to say, but I feel that if we're commonly aligned and we all do the very best that we can do and be, then our expeditions are going to be all the more enjoyable for all. At this point, we want to share with you a little image that has resonance to us. I know you've been patiently listening about our self-indulgently talking about our past, but this is an image taken. It's actually taken on my birthday. Now, for those in the US watching now, my birthday is the 4th of July, and Jørn, and it was just when I was just started. I had only a few days been started at Viking at that point, and I was in Oslo, and Jørn said, "Oh, I've got a birthday present for you. Come to this place." And we went to a tower in a building in Oslo, and I realized that it was Nansen's home. And I'll let Jørn explain a little about the tower, but this is not a place that one normally has access to. And there's a photo taken of us next to the desk that is Nansen's private desk. Now, as a non-Norwegian, I will let Jørn explain, as a Norwegian, quite how Nansen resonates to the Norwegian people, but to all people involved with expeditions, he is one of the absolute founding fathers of how expeditions should be planned and run well. And it further resonates with me if I reflect on it. He was a statesman. He was involved with the origins of the predecessors to the United Nations. He was a nation builder, literally, and a diplomat. He was a scientist, and he was also an expedition leader and runner and organizer. And so for me, he is one of my personal heroes. And to have that photo taken that speaks so much to me of the beginning of the journey I was taking with Viking, and being alongside my colleague and friend Jørn on my birthday with this privileged access, really was a very special moment. But I'll let Jørn explain more about Nansen's tower.
Yeah, well, I think you've given a good background, Damon. Polhøgda, which is the home of Fridtjof Nansen, is actually buried in the garden, and it was his home and where he did studies and where he used to have royalties visiting, and he was essentially a royalty of his time in Norway. Polhøgda, after his death, became, he wanted to donate the place to something that could bring knowledge about polar regions and governance in the rest of the world as well, that could come to the benefit of the world. So today, the Fridtjof Nansen Institute resides there, and they deal with international politics, in particular for polar regions and maritime law. The leader for that institute happened to be a previous lecturer for me at the university. So I didn't feel shy approaching him, and that office in the tower of that house was left as is. It has not been touched since Nansen sat there and planned his expeditions. And it's behind the locked door. It's a research institute. It's not a visitor center, and it's not a place where you can actually just go and pay an entrance fee and visit the tower. It was actually the first time in my life I was in that tower, in that image as well. So Nansen is a huge inspiration for anyone in Norway planning expeditions, but it was so much more, as you mentioned, than a skier and an expedition man. So that was quite an emotional moment, I think, for both of us. So yes, with that, I think we've come to the end. I think we should open for some questions from the listeners.
Fantastic. Yes, we're very much looking forward to future broadcasts. We're going to show a very short film now, just a little bit about how the ships are being designed at the moment. And we hope that for those that you have questions for us, please do submit them. We welcome your questions. And then at the very end, there will be a film that is more broadly about Viking expeditions and how these expeditions are being planned and prepared for your enjoyment.
Creating an expedition ship worthy of the Viking name is no small endeavour, especially when our award-winning ocean and river fleet have set such high standards. When designing vessels to bring our guests to the ends of the earth and back, every part of the ship operations and guest experience has to be carefully considered, and every step of the way guided by our chairman Torstein Hagen, whose attention to detail is second to none. To optimize safety, comfort, and guest flow, the design process was, as usual, an ongoing collaboration of many people, involving our maritime architects, interior designers, and all key departments at Viking. It's a global effort, tapping the expertise and experience of our nautical and technical staff, expedition leaders, enrichment officers, food and beverage, and hotel operations. The goal? To ensure that when our guests set off to explore the world with us, they'll enjoy the same onboard ambiance and our commitment to learning and discovery that's long distinguished Viking from others. Construction begins with the ceremonial first cutting of steel at the shipyard. The next major milestone is the keel laying. This marks the first joining of modular components. It's celebrated with an age-old tradition and a coin from the ship's owner. The coin is meant to bring good fortune when it's welded to the vessel. This is recognized as the moment the ship first comes to life. Stay tuned for the next update on the building of your expedition ship.
All right. We have got some questions in, which we're extremely happy for. And I think I'll pick the first one for you, Damon. It's from Jane in San Diego. It must be petrifying to work below the ice in the Antarctic. Did you ever have any particularly frightening moments or any particularly magical moments?
Well, that's a very good question. I'll pick one of each. I kind of say there are many more magical than frightening. If we start with the magical, when diving under ice, you cut a big hole in ice. Typically, it's fast ice, which means it's about 1 meter thick, and we did a big chainsaw to cut the ice. And then we were diving down, and the water, when ice is on top of it, is very, very clear, especially during the Antarctic winter. With a visibility of 300 feet or more, it's the most clear water that anybody will ever dive in, like diving in gin. And when typically you're diving, it's typically snowing, so there's not a lot of light. And if you dive down under the ice and the snow is on top, it's quite dark except for a shaft of light shining down from the ice hole. But when it's windy, you can be down, very deep down, or relatively deep down. We were diving down to, we had a maximum ceiling of about 170 feet. And many of the dives are in that sort of deeper, but around 130 and 170 feet, because to avoid iceberg scour. When the wind blowed hard and the snow was blown off the ice, it was like someone switching on the lights in a cathedral. And all of a sudden you'd look around you and you could look up to the surface and you could look around and there might be seals swimming around far off distance, or even whales occasionally. And that moment of being exposed to the grandeur of the underwater scenery still lives with me today. I mean, it is still, and I remember the very first time it happened was absolutely extraordinary. I could tell you many more magical ones, but that one really sticks out. In terms of frightening, most things associated with being frightened underwater are to do with having a lack of understanding of marine wildlife. And in short, I had one episode, again, under ice, when a leopard seal grabbed the back of my tank and shook me around. I didn't realize that was a leopard seal. I couldn't see it, it's behind me. And so I had an episode of being shaken around like a rag doll and then let go. And then I swam to the surface not knowing what was going on. It was only afterwards that we realized that my tank and other gear had been chewed. And of course I was very lucky. Leopard seals are extraordinary animals and fearsome predators, and that we have to have immense respect for them. But there was some aspect of what I was doing that was not maybe not very happy for seals. One of the things about scuba is that when you're breathing bubbles, you are exhaling air on what is called open circuit scuba. That is the breathing apparatus that is typically used by divers, most divers, with the exception of those using rebreathers in the modern day. And those bubbles are actually a threat posture to all seals. If you blow bubbles at a seal, what you're saying is, are you tough enough? And of course, occasionally, if you blow bubbles at a leopard seal, they'll answer you. And so every diver diving around seals is sending out threat messages to seals generally, every scuba diver that is, which is why so often photographers use snorkeling or some other method that doesn't involve bubbles when they want to get close and get intimate pictures and things like that. So that was very frightening at the time, although I'm here to tell the tale now, and I realize it was probably my ignorance of understanding seal behavior that led to it. Yeah, I see lots of questions coming in, and I see a question from Grace in New York that says, we would like to visit both polar regions, the Arctic and the Antarctic. Which would you recommend doing first and why?
Wow, Grace, that is a good question, because it is a hard question to answer, because it could be pros and cons doing both first, because there are so many similarities, but though there are quite different destinations. When going to the Arctic, you're much more likely to meet humans that are living there and have a story to tell. When you're going to the Antarctic, it's less of a human encounter experience. Obviously, you will meet all of us on the ship, but there are no indigenous people or people living permanently, except for scientists like Damon living in Antarctica, and we won't be able to visit scientists every day. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to give you any conclusive answer on this. I think you should feel what is right for you. And I think the comparison between these two places is quite interesting. And when you have been on an expedition cruise, having listened in on the lectures, seen yourself being helped interpret what you see, you have a whole different understanding of the nature and the landscape, the wildlife and the wilderness than you have from perhaps watching documentaries or reading books. So I'm really sorry you caught me with a question I can't answer, because they are equally fantastic, and maybe it boils down to logistics. Where do you think it's easier or harder to travel to get to the starting point of the expedition, in terms of how difficult the expeditions are? There's no real difference.
That's a tough one, isn't it, Jørn?
Yep.
I would say, close your eyes. Do you dream of polar bears or penguins?
Yeah.
For us, it's like picking between our children. It's as you say, the comparison is so extraordinary.
Yes.
Yeah, and I see another. Looking through it, I can see another question come here that from Tom in Reno.
Yeah.
Do we need to be athletes to take Viking excursions?
No. No, not at all. Not at all, really. What is it's just like being on an ordinary cruise, where we sometimes do things slightly different, because some places we go to will not have a port infrastructure, for example. That means that we will take our small boats, we call them Zodiacs. They are made from a brand called Zodiac, and we will board them beside the mothership, and we will sail with these small boats to the shore side, where we will gently land on the beach, and you swing your legs over the pontoon of this Zodiac. And if you can do that, swing your legs over the pontoon of the Zodiac, which is lifting them half a foot up, that is essentially the athleticism we ask for, in a way. What we do want to emphasize is obviously that it's a long travel to get to the starting point, and in Antarctica, for example, the sheer feeling of being on a long travel is emphasized by us having a couple of sea days before we reach the Antarctic Peninsula, after having sailed out of South America. So travel endurance, if you like, which you may have gained from other travels, is a great idea, and obviously patience. I think a lot of good athletes have a lot of patience, and if you want to look for different wildlife that may or may not show up at the time you expect it to show up, having that stamina to be out on deck and look and be patient and wait, you will observe the whale or perhaps the polar bear or the penguin that you would so much like to see. So if patience and stamina to be outside is athleticism, yes, you have to be athletes, but from a physical sense, no. It's a very comfortable way of traveling to these regions. Actually, the most comfortable, and you don't need to be an athlete.
Excellent. Well, I see that I see a question's come in that is from Lee in Alexandria. It's a very astute question here. It says, in the Galapagos, each year ships are given a list with the island beach that they are to visit that day. They just can't go anywhere they want. The captain feels the best places and the guest goes want to go. In the Antarctic, do ships choose their landing places based on weather and depth of water, or do they also have places they're limited to? And I'd like to speak to that. It's a very good question. And so the way that in the Antarctic it works is that there are a long list of places where people can go and visit, where tourists can go and visit, and there are guidelines for many of these places. And so at the beginning of each season, all of the expedition operators that work with IATO do set out the voyages that they would like to make, and that includes specific bookings in specific locations. And this manages the human pressure on given sites, so that if there are sensitive sites that only a certain number of vessels may turn up over the course of the season and during the course of the day and things like that. And also it's a bit like a choreography to make sure that there is not pinch points where vessels turn up and cause undue pressure. And as of course weather affects, it's very wild weather there, and so one of the watchwords of any expedition operation is to expect the unexpected, and that running expeditions is about having a plan A and a plan B and then a plan C and then a plan D. So unlike the Galapagos, where it is very constrained to specific locations, there is flexibility, and there is essentially, if you like, a rebooking system that goes on behind the scenes. But it is not an entire free-for-all by any means. And this information is shared between the operators, but is also shared with all the governments that are involved with the governance of the Antarctic as well. And so again, the watchword, as we've been discussing in our conversation, is around cooperation. That cooperative approach enables us collectively to minimize the human pressure on any one location, and also to know where everybody is if, God forbid, there was an accident or an emergency. Then that coordination also enables support and rescue situations to occur as well. Jørn, are you ready for another question?
Yes. Yes.
You may or may not know this. This is a good question. This is a tough one for you. Katie in Parkland has asked, how old was Nansen when he had that office that we were looking at earlier? Now, I don't know, I'm afraid, but you might.
Yeah, Nansen did a lot of things during his life, and first of all, you kind of have to, you can kind of deduce yourself to the answer in a way, because Nansen did his expeditions. That was something he did in his early life, if you like. So in 1888, he was the first to cross Greenland. And from 1893 to 1896, he drifted with the polar ship Fram across the Arctic Ocean and proved that it was a drift of ice in that ocean. He was an oceanographer as well. And in 1905, when Norway gained independence from Sweden, he was instrumental to that and became the first ambassador from Norway to the UK, actually, after that. And then he got his house at Polhøgda, and he did a lot of things ever after. Amongst other things, he created the Nansen Pass after World War I that helped refugees travel freely and back home to their home countries. People that were driven out of their homes because of the war, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize for that, and he died in 1930. Without knowing the exact answer, I can imagine he spent a lot of time between World War I and the end of World War I and 1930 in that office.
Fantastic. I can see another question here. I'm going to keep you on the questions here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Marlene in Reno has asked, please tell us about the ship's submarines we hear about.
Yes. Well, on our expedition ship, we will have 2 submarines. They are quite special submarines, nothing like the Navy ones. We all know what looks like. And these are two spheres with 3 seats in each of them, where you will face out in that sphere is a glass bowl. And around these glass bowls, the machinery and the rest of the cabin and the structure of the submarine is made. So it's an excursion submarine that is rated to 1,000 feet. It's relatively heavy. It's about 10 metric tons. And we will deploy this submarine in Antarctica to perhaps get some of the experience that Damon had when he dove down there.
Fantastic. Well, I can see we're getting questions racing in here. There's another one here from Jiang in San Jose. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. When is the good time to cruise to Antarctica?
Ooh, that's also a very good one. Antarctica is obviously on the southern hemisphere, and they have opposite seasons compared to at least me, who lives far up in the Arctic. So when I have winter time in the Arctic, it's summertime in the Antarctic, and summertime and cruise season is from late October through mid-March approximately. And with Antarctica, it's nice to know that the continent itself is about 20 million square kilometers large. But in the winter time, the sea ice forms, a brim of sea ice forms around the continent that effectively makes the white surface of Antarctica twice as big. So another 20 million square meters of sea ice forms. And the remnants, and that's the sea ice that thaws in the summertime when we do have cruising season. But early season, October, November, we will see remnants of that sea ice, and it will taper off across the season. We will always have some sea ice and ice in the water and iceberg. There's an iceberg guarantee, by the way. So it kind of depends a little bit. If you really love a lot of sea ice, come early, and if you want to see the chicks of the penguins, it's slightly a little bit into the season, but depending on which landing site you come to in Antarctica, they will be in different phases as well, the penguin colonies. And you essentially can't go wrong if you come. But from late October, beginning of November to mid-March. I hope that answered.
Well, it certainly does, and I'm going to add a little. Mary from Harvard in Massachusetts has said, Arctic versus Antarctic, what's the best for viewing icebergs? I thought just to add to your iceberg guarantee question, I think.
Yeah.
Statement. What do you think?
Well, the icebergs in Antarctica are larger yes. Because they break off from these ice shelves. The glacier covering the whole continent of Antarctica is several miles thick, and all this ice flows with gravity to the coasts. And when they don't really stop flowing at the coast, on the contrary, they get sometimes less resistant and they keep flowing out, and it becomes floating glaciers. And these floating glaciers are called ice shelves, and they break off and they form tabular icebergs. And those are the largest icebergs. In Svalbard, every once in a while you see a tabular iceberg from some of the eastern glaciers and from some of the Russian Arctic. But you also have very, very large glaciers in the Arctic that calve off really very dramatically shaped icebergs, perhaps even more dramatically shaped icebergs in the Arctic than the Antarctic, but smaller.
I realize that was a tough question. Well answered there.
Yeah, actually, I do have one question for you, Damon. It's from Noel in Malibu. So happy to hear how you protect the polar regions. Can't wait for our Antarctica trip. How swift can the water flow when diving under the ice? Is that an impediment?
Well, interesting question. I'm delighted, Noel, that you're coming on an Antarctic voyage. There is relatively low tidal movements in Antarctic waters. So there's, in terms of tidal movements, that is not too much of an impediment. There are certain locations where water can be flowing, and then paradoxically, when the water is fast flowing, it tends not to have so much ice forming around it. We, of course, pick areas when you're scuba diving or diving with submersibles. The water movement is an important part of making sure things are safe. In polar regions, the main concern is sudden water movements from Jørn's previous point about ice movements. And so locations around the fronts of ice shelves and glaciers, especially large tabular icebergs, for example, if and when they break, you get sudden water movements. And of course, that would be something that is an impediment in scuba diving and is something that we would be very mindful of when doing all the planning for our submersible diving when we are there with our submersibles. I hope that's reassuring, and it's been fantastic talking with you. I think as time marches on, we're going to, I can see the questions are still flowing. I'm sorry I haven't been able to answer all the questions that will come in, but thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for indulging us in discussing our past, and we very much hope that we'll be joining you again on future Expedition Wednesdays to share more of what we're planning with Viking Expeditions.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And now we're going to show you a video about Viking Expeditions and the destinations that we're planning to go to. So till next time.
Centuries ago, the Vikings established a tradition of exploration that took them to Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and the shores of North America. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, intrepid Norwegians again led the way, exploring the vast, largely unknown polar regions. This heritage of firsts continues with Viking. We first popularized river cruising, then reinvented the ocean voyage, and now we're leading the way once more with journeys to the extraordinary. Introducing Viking Expeditions. Thoughtfully curated, refreshingly innovative, once-in-a-lifetime experiences in the wilds of the Arctic, Antarctica and the Great Lakes, nestled in the heart of North America.
These are places that very few people will ever have the privilege of visiting, which is why it's so important for us to deliver the very best experience we possibly can to our guests. It's experiences that create memories for a lifetime, but also hopefully give them another lens through which they view our beautiful world.
Our Antarctic Explorer is a fascinating 13-day journey, introducing our guests to this majestic continent.
It is truly the greatest wilderness on the planet. In a world of nearly 8 billion people, there's a continent the size of North America that has not yet been colonised.
Its many wonders revealed to our guests by knowledgeable Viking experts.
It is somewhere that you viscerally experience, feeling the wind, feeling the isolation. You might have seen a sunrise before, but not like an Antarctic one. You might have seen bioluminescence before, but not like you'll see in the Southern Ocean. It's like with the volume dialed to 11.
During the Antarctic summer, the bitter cold weather gives way to long daylight hours and relatively mild weather, making it the perfect time to explore the many remarkable aspects of this pristine environment.
Seeing wildlife that is completely not scared of human beings. To see those in their natural habitat, in such abundance, in such a wild place, is quite an experience unlike anything else on the planet.
With extensive programs both on board and on shore, our guests will enjoy an unprecedented immersion into the grandeur of the last continent. At the top of the world, our Arctic adventure itinerary takes our guests to Svalbard and the edge of the polar ice cap. For 13 days of unending exploration, they'll experience the stark, haunting beauty of the Arctic in the Svalbard archipelago, lands of rugged fjords and much, much more.
The scenery is so unusual. The sea ice, the glaciers and the ice sheets are so outside of most people's normal experience. It is a completely different world. You really feel as though you're as far away as you possibly can be from civilization. And indeed you are.
In Svalbard, Viking guests will enjoy dramatic ice-sculpted landscapes in this ever-changing region. It's a robust ecosystem that bursts with life and activity for just a few precious months each year. This is a rare opportunity to search for nature's most elusive creatures under the lingering midnight sun. Beyond the breathtaking wildlife and raw beauty, our guests will explore other aspects of Svalbard, including remote outposts like Barentsburg, a Russian coal mining town carved from the wilderness. Mining thrived in Longyearbyen, Svalbard's capital, too, and our guests can step into this world below the surface. Or they can learn about Svalbard's important global seed bank, as part of their fascinating adventure in the Arctic. Tucked into the border of the United States and Canada is an immense, deeply complex ecosystem where the world's largest body of fresh water stretches far beyond the horizon. The Great Lakes encompass more than 94,000 square miles. Viking now covers all of them with 4 intriguing itineraries. Voyages that explore their vast coastlines and stunning beauty.
We are going to learn more about the nature. We're going to make sure that we open the destinations to our guests in the way of interpreting what we see, in the way of explaining the natural phenomena.
With extensive programs on board and on shore, both above and below the surface, our guests will enjoy an unparalleled opportunity to learn more about the region, its pioneering past, along with its rich indigenous heritage, traditions and culture.
We're going to have scientists, we're going to have senior lecturers that cover history, geology, biology, bringing everybody on board to a higher level of understanding.
It's part of our commitment to ensure Viking guests experience this spectacular region in a way most never will. The polar regions and the Great Lakes are rare treasures that really shouldn't be missed, and Viking's approach is unlike any other.
The Viking way of exploring the world is designed to allow our guests to not only observe, but very much engage with the world. And you'll see that in our expeditions experiences, which set a whole new standard.
These are the thinking person's expeditions. We believe travel should be a doorway to insight and new discoveries. And every crew member on our expedition ships is committed to making those moments happen.
While some merely cruise to these places, with Viking Expeditions, you are on an expedition ship, you're getting knowledgeable lecturers, bringing to life the history of the place and putting these places in a global context.
Before our guests travel, we recommend carefully curated reading materials and filmographies that inform and enlighten. And once the journey begins, our guests will find world-class lectures, access to experts, and extensive daily briefings.
Our aim is to always deliver extraordinary experiences wherever in the world our guests are sailing with us, and that there is always an educational component. I think we all aspire to know more, not less. And in the case of our expeditions experiences, there is a lot to learn.
Sharing these lands requires expertise. To help our guests best explore and understand these unrivaled destinations, we've assembled a world-class expedition team to lead and assist in these pristine places. Leaving our guests free to be curious, to learn and to explore in comfort, surrounded by the company of like-minded travelers.
We have an internal motto: if we can't do things well, we won't do it at all. And when it comes to our expeditions project, there are 3 critical components. It's the hardware, the ship, it's the software, the experts, and it's our partners.
To explore the world's most remote regions, there are 2 purpose-built, cutting-edge expedition-class ships, Viking Octantis and Viking Polaris. Inside, our 378 guests will find serene Scandinavian interiors, plus panoramic views at every turn. And they'll experience all the comfort and elegance of our award-winning ocean fleet, including many of the beloved existing spaces so unique to Viking. When it comes to accommodations, there are 3 Nordic balcony stateroom categories, plus spacious Nordic balcony junior suites, explorer suites, and an owner suite.
Because we do have the most capable ship you can imagine. We will have so many opportunities. We are going to be able to put ourselves into those very favorable situations of being where the wildlife is, being where the ice is, and where it all happens.
To complement our advanced expedition ships, we hand-picked experts to lead our guests in these extraordinary environments. Our skilled expedition team consists of over 25 experts in their fields, each well-versed on the unique geography, geology, and wildlife our guests will encounter. They'll share insights and teach guests about these delicate ecosystems and the importance of preserving them for generations to come.
With the right expert by your side, you really can have an amazing experience, and worlds will open to you that you didn't even realize existed. I didn't realize that I was interested in flowers. Our leader handed me a microscopic monocular and had me focus in on a little saxifraga. That's an Arctic flower. And all of a sudden, I was transferred into this world of beauty, of color and pollen, and it was unbelievable.
To further enhance our enrichment program and commitment to destination-focused learning, we've also partnered with some of the world's most renowned institutions.
We're very pleased and proud and honored that several of the world's leading institutions within the fields of marine biology, botany, ornithology, glaciology, and atmospheric sciences have signed on. So we feel very fortunate and very credible in our efforts.
We are setting the bar at a new level. We are convinced there's not going to be others that have that level of education on board.
When it comes to itineraries, our expeditions in the polar regions are different from the set schedules of Viking's ocean and river ships.
Our itineraries are, of course, planned, but you can't dictate to nature. You cannot dictate the weather, you cannot dictate animal migration or appearances, so we are very flexible, such that we can seize the opportunity to capture those great moments when they happen.
While the itineraries are more structured on our Great Lakes voyages, Viking's unwavering commitment to discovery and learning is the same on all our expeditions, providing our guests with significant opportunities to immerse themselves in their surroundings, sending them home with memories they'll forever treasure.
I like to make sure that we are taking advantage of the serendipitous happenings and events that is going on in nature. That's why we've planned plenty of time. We are not in a rush to get from one place to another. The wildlife, the culture, and the things we observe set the agenda on our voyages. What we do end up with is a unique trip every single time we sail out.
Viking Expeditions is one more step in our drive to introduce our guests to as much of the world as possible.
Ultimately, our goal is to share with our guests more of the destination, more of the nature, more of the culture, more of the animals, more of the people. Let them get closer.
With the launch of Viking Expeditions, our guests will now be able to sail to the farthest reaches of the globe and explore closer to home. It's exploration the Viking way, in complete comfort.
What I like people to feel is that they become a part of the expedition team. You know, we're making this voyage together.
We'd like our guests to return home with much more than pretty pictures. That's nice too, but the experience should be profound.